What's going on, everybody? This is AJ with Blue to Green Podcast. On this episode, I sit down with a man by the name of Mr. Jon Romano. John, in the year 2004, at the age of 16 years old, entered his high school with a shotgun with the intent of shooting up the place and ultimately wanted to be killed by law enforcement in a suicide by cop attempt. That did not happen. John did enter the high school with a shotgun. John did fire off a few shots. He was ultimately subdued by one of the staff and was arrested, and after that, he served 17 years in prison. I know there's going to be a lot of controversy on this particular episode. Should he have a platform? Should he not have a platform? None of that matters to me. What mattered to me was the message that he has and what he's trying to do, and that is to share his story of what he went through in his youth regarding his mental health, the treatments that he got, and what led him down this path, why he felt the way he felt, and why he did what he did. That story was more important to me than other people's feelings. And I do feel for the victims of what he did. And we did discuss that and we did talk about that. But like I said, ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that he is attempting to do a good thing, which is to spread his message and to give people hope and kids hope to be heard. And also, more importantly, some ideas for school administrators, for law enforcement, for kids to be heard and not go down this path, not take these actions and not do what he did and come up with a solution to have a better outcome in life, especially for kids who have it hard or who are having, whether it's homicidal or suicidal ideations. So I think this is an important episode to get out there. Please do me a favor, like, comment, subscribe. Send this episode to your SROs if you know any regarding in the law enforcement world. Send this to school administrators because, again, I do think his message is important, and I do think his message is one of hope and finding a solution to some of the mental health that all these kids are facing these days, which it's a complicated world. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. I appreciate it. Let me know what you think on this one. I'll put in all of his contact information as well. He's spoken at police academies and the FBI conferences and stuff like that because he is trying to help and assist law enforcement. So again, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Take care.
All right, he threw some things out of the car. We're right there. He's throwing some things out the passenger side. They're along the wall, the slow lane wall. 619, he's throwing dope out the window. We got Bill the marijuana coming out.
619, I copy Bill. Marijuana coming out of the window at 2328.
So anyways, yeah, let's get started. So you and I had a meeting. Like I reached out to you a few months ago. I saw some of your content online. And first and foremost, I definitely am feeling a tiny bit under the weather. So I'm definitely feeling it a little bit because of my son. So I apologize for that.
Okay.
But I reached out to you a couple months ago. I saw some of your content and been following you ever since. And basically getting down to brass tacks is that when you were 16, you entered your school with a shotgun and and had the intent of shooting up the school. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. So my intent was definitely, I went in there knowing I'd be terrorizing and traumatizing everybody, right?
Okay.
I wanted to do that because unfortunately, I went from feeling alone and feeling the pain, and I was struggling with a lot of mental health issues, although that's not to blame, but I I had a large grievance against some of the school administration. And basically, I just didn't want to take accountability for my life being shit. And I wanted to be mad at other people. I wasn't mad to the point where I was willing to, end the lives of other people, but I wanted their lives to be as fucked up as I felt like mine was, right? Because I always believed that everybody else's life must be better than mine. Or even though I had a pretty good life as far as middle class suburbs, I never had to worry about food or shelter or any of that stuff. But still, when I had some issues with my, honestly, I don't know if it's just chemical imbalance or what, but I just didn't feel any pleasure anymore. I lost all sense of pleasure. And I wanted to be mad at other people. I didn't want to be, taking that accountability and saying like, yeah, no, I need to do different. I wanted everybody else to be doing different. So when that didn't happen, I got mad, and yeah, I wanted to terrorize everybody. I wanted to die, and I wanted to end my life in a way that would ruin the lives of others, while also, in my mind, I would go out and, the blaze of glory, because my intent was basically to go out suicide by cop. I know a lot of your audience is law enforcement, so
Hmm.
I'm sure they're very well. It's a sad reality that I couldn't pull the trigger on myself. So I knew if I cause a disturbance, if I do this at my school, they are definitely showing up locked and loaded and ready to end my life. And so that was my intent. As messed up as it is, um, I tried to talk about it because I want to shed light on that darkness that was within me. It's therapeutic for me to continue to talk about it, whether in therapy, but also when I share with other people. It feels good because, one, I'm helping educate people so that we can hopefully prevent it from happening again. Unfortunately, we know it will be
Right.
happening again and again and again. But that's why I speak out, is because I did 17 years in prison. And when I came home, I had already done, when I was in prison, I'd done some interviews and talking with academics who were in the field of trying to prevent these things from happening. But when I came home, now law enforcement was also interested in talking with me. And, there was a local deputy who was in charge of a school resource officer program. And when he reached out to me and said that, he had heard I was wanting to help out, we met up and we talked and we had a great conversation. And we kind of went from there to, he invited me to a conference where they
Okay.
would be having a whole lot of law enforcement from upstate New York
Okay.
attending. And, I was able to do that. So that's me kind of jumping around a little bit. Um, but yeah, so I'm doing my best now to help others, um, because there's also so many teens and adults who think like I once did.
Right. So
And
I want to
go-
ask you about that though, like kind of back it up a little bit.
yeah,
What was your childhood like? I mean, we don't have to go in depth, but like as much you would like to talk
yeah,
about, what caused you to get to that point of despair and not feeling joy or happiness and wanted everybody else to be as unhappy as you were? You did say maybe it was mental illness, but that wasn't not to blame. So
right.
I'm kind of curious about that statement though.
Yeah, no, all right. So, yeah, I talk about my childhood all the time because, um, and again, so many people go through worse than what I did. But I'll tell you that when I was about 4 years old, my father left. And shortly after that, I was groomed and sexually abused for a couple of years. Um, and I open up about that because I never opened up until I was in prison. I never
Okay.
told anybody that I'd been sexually abused as a small child until I was already in prison. And it was only because I saw another man open up and talk about it himself. And I was like, wow, this is somebody who I look up to, somebody who definitely seems pretty strong. So I opened up about that because I didn't know what was happening to me when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, obviously. And I've been told this is what people in love do. And then I even remember to the point where when it stopped, when I was probably about 7 years old, I thought I had done something wrong. I thought I had somehow, I was unlovable. And it wasn't until I was a little bit older, and this is where things start to fall apart a bit for me. And this is why I talk about the sexual abuses, because then when I'm 12, 13 years old, and I start to look back, and now with new awareness of my body and sex and everything, I look back and I'm like falling apart, realizing what had happened to me. And yeah, I felt guilt and shame though, because I felt this was something horrible that I had done, that I had participated
Okay.
in. I had done something horrible. And um, yeah, I was afraid to open up to family, friends, even when I asked to go to therapy when I was 15 years old. I never opened up about that,
Okay. So
you
you went
know?
to therapy but didn't do the work. You
And
didn't know you're 15.
exactly. Well, exactly, because then, I go from a pretty good student of B's and some A's. playing baseball. And I loved baseball growing up. I tried other sports, but baseball was my go-to. But then when I'm 13, I tell my mom, like, no, I'm good. I don't want to play anymore. But I was still social, so she wasn't that worried. And yeah, but eventually I just start to feel that emptiness creeping in. And I got to the point where I was about 15 years old, and I now had been, failing some of my classes. I was getting into trouble for, skipping school,
Okay.
skipping classes. I just didn't care, you know. And I was still social though, but I just wasn't me,
Could
and
you feel it?
I could feel it. It was creeping up for a little bit, but by the time I was about 15, I literally from school one day, I called my mom and I told her, I said, something's wrong. Like, I just don't feel right. And I need help. I need to get out of here. I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to, not just be in school. I don't want to live sometimes, you know? So of course, my mom, she does everything she can to try to help me.
Was
She
she
literally
aware of the
comes.
sexual assault at this time?
No,
Okay,
like I
you had
said,
kept that all hidden.
I kept that hidden. She didn't know about it until I was already in prison.
Okay.
Because, like I said, she does everything she can. She literally picks me up from school that day, sets up a doctor's appointment with my general physician, and his first thing is kind of like, all right, we're going to try to get you in some therapy, but for now, you know here's a prescription. um I can't even remember which antidepressant it
Okay.
was. um but so now I'm starting to get my life back on track, right? Where I've opened up to my mom, not all the way obviously, but I've said I need help. And uh I start going to therapy, and I just don't open up though,
Okay.
right? But I am trying to do some work on. um but it's also the I'm not putting in all the work, so I'm not getting
Right.
the great results. And because I didn't get the great results, I started to feel more depressed of, well, I'm going to therapy and it's not helping me.
Gotcha.
Nothing's going to help me. And I start basically cutting myself, and I keep that hidden, but eventually it gets found out. And my mom asked me if I'm willing to go to a mental hospital for a little bit, voluntarily get some help and all like that. And I'm like, yeah, you know.
Okay.
But honestly, like as soon as I show up, they start putting me on some harder medication.
This has
Um,
happened in New York, correct?
this is in upstate New York.
Approximately
Uh,
what year?
so this is 2003. I'm
Okay.
15 years old, and they start putting me on Zyprexa, which is a very heavy medication for antipsychotic or
Okay.
bipolar disorder, stuff that I don't have issues with. And then this really starts up a trend of like a cocktail of psych meds for me.
Mm.
Um, but also at the same time, while I'm only in the hospital for about a week. But while I'm there, because I'm a minor, I have to be attending school classes. And so the hospital reaches out to my high school, which was pretty local, and my high school says like, yeah, no, they're not sending over any work. They're really not going to do anything to help me while I'm in there. And I'm literally in a juvenile unit, and they force me. I still have to go to this classroom there with like 20 other kids, and I'm the only one who has a high school that wouldn't send any work. So
Oh,
they
wow.
literally just have me like reading a book, and they're even telling me like this is unheard of. And so I bring this up only to say that the pathway to violence starts with a grievance, right?
Okay.
And so this is where my grievance starts up, is because then even when I get out of the hospital and I'm trying to communicate with my school that, all right, I need a little bit of extra help, I need some tutoring, I need to get myself back on track. And I even requested an IEP, an
Hmm.
individual education plan. And my psychologist, my psychiatrist, everybody signs off on it, and school says no. You do not qualify. They claimed that basically I was the first person in that school to claim that clinical depression is a learning disability, which in their own paperwork it is.
Okay.
And that it, made me eligible for an IEP, but they didn't want to give it to me. I know now, because I've spoken with a lot of people, that it's all about dollars and cents. They don't like giving out IEPs. They don't like having to spend more of their resources on an individual who they just don't think is a real problem,
Understood.
And so this kind of continues, my being upset and angry at the school of like, I'm trying to do what I can to get my life back on track. Why are you, basically telling me to fuck off? And so I start to get kind of angry more and more, but they don't do anything for me until my mom hires an attorney.
Okay.
And the attorney basically lets them know, we are going to make sure to drag you through the media and sue you, and it's not going to go well for you. And suddenly then they can give me an IEP.
Right.
But this is May and the school year is practically over. I failed pretty much all of my classes.
Were you a sophomore? Roughly?
Yeah, I was a sophomore.
15 sophomore?
Yeah, so again, I start to get upset and angry, and I'm just kind of like, fuck it, doing what I can. Also, at one point before this, they had told me, try homeschooling. If you're not getting what you need from us here, try some homeschooling. And so we tried that. But as anybody will know, the worst thing that you can do for somebody who's clinically depressed or suffering from most mental illnesses is to isolate them.
Right.
So now the homeschooling basically just isolates me, and, things aren't getting any better. They're geting worse.
Was it your mom that did the homeschooling part of it?
So she had to hire somebody basically to, meet up at a public library and,
Gotcha.
and do stuff like that.
So if somebody who's not involved in that type of process isn't even going to know where to begin to start to do that type of stuff. So
right, yeah, and so this is basically, again, these things compile in my mind of they're not doing anything to help me. They don't care about me, and I'm not justifying, by the way, I'm not trying to justify or make excuses for what I did. This is just the mindset that I had at 15 and 16 years old. Because then as the next school year starts, right, so we're getting into the fall of 2003. The shooting happens in February of 2004.
Okay.
I start out the school year and trying to get back on track, and it's just not working for me. And I've been told once I'm 16, I can drop out and get my GED elsewhere, right? I turned 16 in October, and I'm told, unfortunately, the rules are actually you have to turn 16 before the school year starts to technically drop out. And so I'm kind of like, all right, I'll stick through with this as much as I can. But then my therapist, clues me into the fact that I could enroll in one of the local community colleges for continuing education. And that would basically, I'd be taking some college courses, getting college credits while getting my GED at the same time.
But you're still in school.
But I'm still technically enrolled in school. But my mom says, you know what? Like, the school's not trying to help you. Don't show up.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Once I was accepted into one of the local community colleges, we figure, all right, January 2004, that semester starts up. I'm moving on. Screw it if I'm, what they call dual enrolled.
Okay.
I'm enrolled in both the high school and the community college, but the high school basically says good riddance to you. They don't want nothing. They don't want, you know what I mean? They don't care that I'm not showing up, even though I'm still technically enrolled there. But I'm improving at this point as well, because it's like, all right, now we've got these plans for my future. I'm going to get my education taken care of. And, honestly, at this point, too, one of my older brothers was in the Army. He was 101st Airborne, and we're talking early 2000s. So he was over in Iraq, Afghanistan, and he was finishing up his tours, and he was finishing up his 4 years. And as he's getting ready to come home, and we had never really hung out or nothing, but he's talking about like we should get together, go hunting, spend some time together like that. And I'm kind of like, all right, yeah, no, definitely. And also, I'm thinking like I want to join the military as well, you know. So I'm really looking up to him, and I'm really kind of like excited to have these prospects of like, all right, get my GED, get a little bit of college, join the military. The military will help pay for the rest of my college. Like, all the pieces are coming together in my mind. But then I'll be honest with you too. As I'm getting better, we're also like, okay, they're taking me off of my medications now.
Okay. Did you feel that the medications were helping you at that up until that point in time?
I think that one of them was because they had, like I stated earlier, they had started me on basically a cocktail.
Right, which is never good.
SSRIs,
okay,
right? Xanax was a big one. Like I said, Cybrexa was a big one, and then Ambien. So I'm on psych meds, sleeping pills, all of this stuff. And they start to now wean me off, and they keep me on Xanax, which at the time I didn't know like how powerful Xanax really is.
Right.
Because to me, it's just kind of, it takes me from like, freaking out a little bit to calming me down. So I stay on Xanax and nothing else.
Okay.
However, this is when I start to also backtrack more and more, right? Everybody's now thinking that I'm doing better. I'm moving in the right direction. I'm talking about my future being positive. But I start to have the struggles where like some days it's just like it used to be.
Okay.
And I didn't want to admit that. People were happy. People were proud. My mom was no longer worrying about basically coming home and finding me having killed myself or something. I didn't want to worry her or anybody else. I didn't want them to know that, no, I'm still struggling.
Had you expressed suicidal ideation prior to that to your mother or to your therapist or anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my mom had known that I was suicidal. My therapist had known that I was suicidal, but this was also now, as a teenager, it seemed like a very long time. I was in therapy for, like a year, which for me at that time seemed like forever.
Right.
But I had made a lot of superficial progress, but I never dealt with the deeper issues. Even though I admitted to being suicidal, even though I admitted to just struggling to get out of bed, we dealt more with, well, how can we just like motivate you and get you more energy?
Not understanding that there was sexual trauma in the past.
Exactly. I never opened up and talked about the sexual abuse. I never talked about how it led me to question so much about myself. At 13, 14, 15 years old, coming to the realization that I've been sexually abused by another man, I start questioning, how will other people view me? How will they see me? Will they judge me thinking that I had done something wrong because in my mind I had?
Right.
Will they see me as less of a man, weak? All these things are going on in my mind that I know now are very common for sexual abuse victims. But at the time I felt alone because also I tell people, this is early 2000s. Talking openly about sexual abuse was very rare,
right?
Especially for men. It's still rare to this day, 20 years later.
Amen.
But for me, I remember literally thinking to myself, this is common for women, girls, and, like I used to kind of joke about it in my mind about like, oh, altar boys, because that was being talked about. That was pretty much all you ever heard about for boys being, sexually abused. And so yeah, I never talked about that in therapy like I wish I would. I never talked about it with anybody the way that I wish I had. And so it's this kind of perfect storm of these different factors of, I think my depression isn't just environmental. It's not just because I was abused. I think that there really probably, is a chemical imbalance, going on within me then, and I still struggle with it to this day sometimes. Thankfully today I'm just better able to cope with it.
Right.
But then my struggles with school, and I just don't talk about everything as in depth as I wish I had. And it just builds up within me. So even as I'm getting better, I'm still struggling at times, and I don't open up about that.
If I may
So
ask, pardon my interruption.
yeah, go right ahead.
Couple questions. Did you ever get justice for the person who abused you?
No, I never, talked about it except with family and then in therapy. And even though I speak about it publicly now, I never sought criminal action, you know,
Do you
for
still have to
multiple
see this
reasons.
person?
No,
Okay.
you know, um, so yeah, I never sought that out. Um, I did, jumping ahead a little bit, but while I was in prison, and as I'm doing now, I'm in prison. Unfortunately, it wasn't until I was in prison for years that I started to do the deep work that I needed to.
Okay.
But I wrote a letter to my abuser, and I wrote a letter to people who, would be able to basically address that individual and know about this individual now. But I never really got any response.
No, nobody responded.
Nobody in that sense. Like my family, as soon as I told them, basically they were there for me. But there was never any real talk about criminal action or anything of that nature, because we're talking, I didn't open up until 15 years later. um you know so yeah.
Was there any moving into this, was there any positive male role models in your life at this time?
Yeah, so
Father in the
that's
picture?
that's a really great question, because yeah, my father had left when I was young, like I said, and he was in my life. It was like a every other weekend type situation. However, you know when I grew up from a child into a younger man, I started to realize my father's not, the idol I used to look up to.
Gotcha.
uh,
Gotcha.
he has a lot of his own issues, he has a lot of his own demons, and um, he just was not somebody that I ended up looking up to. I did have uncles who were great in my life, but again, I think that sometimes when there's a lot of stigma around, whether we're talking about sexual abuse, whether we're talking about mental illness, or just talking about vulnerability. Vulnerability is seen as only weakness,
Right.
even among men then and now, oftentimes. So there was men that I was looking up to, but I never felt comfortable opening up about this or anything else to them. I just felt like life sucks. You do what you can to push forward and brave it out.
Right. Right. And unfortunately, that's the old school mentality. That's the suck it up, buttercup, just push through,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
But I'll be honest, though, that was also a little bit of my viewpoint I had as a teenager looking at some of the men in my life.
Okay.
Whereas now I realize and have talked with them that, yeah, my uncles are people that I could have opened up to, just because we didn't have that kind of relationship or we never talked about it. If I had brought it up myself, they would have, done everything they could to help me. But I know that now only as an adult,
Right. Right.
having that more of a adult relationship with my uncles or with the other, men who were there. Um, so unfortunately, yeah, there was no real strong male role model to deal with these issues. And even in my day-to-day life, my mom did the greatest job that she could, raising, me and some of my, my brother and sister. But yeah, I think all boys kind of question, what is manhood? What does it mean to be a man?
Sure.
How's a man
Sure.
supposed to act? And yeah, I do tell people that sometimes I wish there had been somebody who had been a little bit more closer to and a little bit more a part of my day-to-day life.
Gotcha. So you said you're moving into January of 2004-ish,
Yeah,
and
so
you're doing superficial work on the mental health side, and it appears as though things are getting better on the outside, but on the inside of who you are, you're not feeling You're getting any
Right.
better. Were you regressing at all? Was there a trigger or a catalyst that was causing this?
So I think it is also into the isolation factor, right? And this is when it
Okay.
gets into some of the social effects of now I'd also dropped out of high school, basically, right? I'm
Okay.
still technically enrolled, but I'm not going. So I'm also not getting that social interaction with my friends like I was. I still had friends who at this time, it was before social media, but like instant messenger on AOL and all
Yeah.
like that, or hanging out on weekends and stuff. But it's just not the same. I'm starting to feel more and more isolated. And even as January comes and I start to attend classes at a community college, I'm 16 years old and I
Right.
felt very self conscious. I felt very, those 2 years or 3 years between me and everybody else in my mind was this huge, disparaging, it's just this huge difference that I talked with people, but I never felt connected with people. And that might have all been in my mind. Um, but yeah, so I did start to just feel more and more socially isolated, even as I said, I still have some friends I'm hanging out with. I still dating at the time, but it's like I'm just not having that same day-to-day interaction with people like I once was. And it was a bit of a blow to me, because I had always been, even in my depression, I I was still kind of outgoing but quiet. You know what I
Okay.
mean? I
You're
still wanted to
introverted.
be out with friends, but I was no longer as talkative and as, I would never have called myself the life of the party, but I was willing to go out. I wanted to go out, but I just wasn't there.
Gotcha.
In fact, it's important. I tell people, I remember as a teenager, and I think we do this as adults, if only I had X, Y, and Z, my life would be so much better. And as a teenager, it's if only I had, a bunch of really great friends, a beautiful girlfriend, if things are going well with all that, life will be beautiful. But even in this time period, as I'm making these improvements in my life, as I'm trying to do with the work, as superficial as it was, I remember times where I'm hanging out with friends. I'm literally at my house, 15 years old, I've got like 8 or 9 friends over, my girlfriend sitting next to me, and I felt absolutely completely alone. We're hanging out, watching movies, and I'm just feeling absolutely alone. Not because I'm in a room full of people who I don't know or a room full of people who don't like me. No, I'm in a room full of people who love me. And I felt absolutely alone. And
It's that depression kicking in.
yeah, it was that depression. And that, you know, that was definitely hard. But then, like I said, now when we're coming into January and I'm no longer even around my friends as much. And like I said, I talk about this because I do get asked a lot about how social I was. Did
Sure.
I feel any type of isolation in the time beforehand? And looking back now, I'm like, you know what? There definitely was, a true feeling of loneliness and isolation, whether it was sometimes just in my mind or sometimes, yeah, I just wasn't around people like I was before. And that took a toll on me. Um, and so, yeah, but I will say that I kept just trying to push forward. And even to the point, now we're getting into February. The shooting happens on Monday, February 9th, 2004.
Okay.
And um, the week beforehand was when I talked with my mom, innocently about, well, my older brother wants to start, hunting and stuff like that next year. Would that be okay next year? My mom's like, well, I'm not too sure about that. She's still worried about me, obviously.
Right.
So I go into my therapist's office and I say, this is what, is going on. I think that I'm doing much better. Um, and again, I'm not telling him the truth because part of me was not doing much better. But I'm telling him I'm doing much better. I would love to be able to do this with my brother next year and everything. And he's just kind of like, yeah, no, I see nothing wrong with it. And at the end of the session, he invites my mom in, as he always does, just to kind of recap anything I might want to say to her, or she can ask me questions in front of him as a mediator. But that time, I bring it up of like, hey, can we talk about me being able to hunt, learn how to use a rifle, because I've been to the shooting range once or twice with older brothers, but
Let
I
me ask you
wanted
real quick, and I apologize.
yeah.
Had you shown any propensity for violence prior to this?
Yeah, so the only violence, the only fight or anything I had been in previous to all of this was, yeah, I got into one fight my sophomore year. I started it. It was you know, honestly, um I know this guy's girlfriend. I have a couple of classes with her. I overheard her talking with her friends. He's abusive, and in my mind, I'm like, I'm not even friends with her, but she's a smaller girl and he's a bigger guy, right? I'm always one of the biggest guys in my class. I'm 6'4" now, and this was a bigger guy like me. So that kind of set something off with me. And this is also like, as my depression is there and I'm just not caring about, like, this is when I'm getting into trouble skipping classes.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so I basically jumped on this guy, justified it in my mind, but that's the
Okay.
only act of violence I'd ever committed before all of this. So when I'm talking with my therapist, with my mom there, my therapist looks at my mom and says, "You have your son back." Right? We both remember those exact words, because that's when my mom basically felt like a weight lifted off her shoulder, where she felt like this was just a bump in the road. This was just a dark time period, but I have my son back. We can move forward and, keep working to progress, but I have my son back. And so my therapist says this to her. And then, later that day, I also see a psychiatrist at that
Okay.
time, and she says the same thing of, yeah, no, she has no problem with me having access to firearms, or going hunting or any like thing like that. So, my mom starts being like, oh, okay, and she's, unbeknownst to me, she starts talking with one of her coworkers about it, and he's suggesting, um, you know, maybe trying out a shotgun. And my mom's like, oh yeah, no, when she was younger, she used to go skeet shooting and target shooting and all like that. So she starts thinking that, well, maybe if we get a shotgun, I'll be able to use it for hunting. She'll, go with me for target practice, skeet shooting, home defense, all of that. Um, so she's like, all right, yeah, no, it's something that she's definitely now on board with. And local gun store is going out of business. They're having a going out of business sale, and she brings it up to me of like, hey, why don't we go over, see what they got, talk to them, and maybe we can take advantage of their sale. All right, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And so we go over and end up looking at different things, and she picks out a shotgun that we both agree on. It's a 12 gauge, and yeah, she'd even spoken with the police department. It was basically like across the street, basically, and they said, yeah, as long as your son's 16, keep it
Hmm.
locked up. That's it. You're good to go. Um, so that's literally Saturday, 2 days before the shooting.
Okay.
And in my mind, I'm in the store and all I'm thinking about is hunting,
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
because this actually becomes a triggering event, because when, in my mind, I'm now being trusted,
Okay.
right? And I'm feeling like, oh shit, like all right,
Let-
this is going to be great. I can't wait.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you were speaking to your therapist and your psychiatrist
Mhm.
and all that, and I understand that you had said that you weren't doing all of the work, you weren't being fully
Right.
honest with them. Were you omitting facts because of what you were feeling, or were you omitting facts because there was a hidden agenda behind your words?
Yeah, great question, right? So I was basically omitting facts, but mostly because of how I was feeling,
Okay.
right? There was no hidden agenda of like, someday I might do something and I don't
Okay.
want any red flags to pop up about me. I was honestly omitting facts. I wasn't being fully open and honest because, I think part of me was even to my therapist and psychiatrist. I didn't want to talk about being sexually abused.
Understood.
I didn't always want to. Yeah, I talked about being suicidal at times, But then as I'm somewhat progressing and doing better, I I didn't want, and it's a weird thing, I wanted their approval, which is a weird
Understood.
thing that I've learned is pretty common even in therapy, that you want the approval of your therapist. So I didn't even open up, especially as a kid. I didn't open up because now it's basically they're telling me like, you're doing great, we're proud of you. And I was afraid to tell them I'm not doing that great
Gotcha.
sometimes, you know. So I'm getting a little emotional because when people ask me uh, if there's one thing I could tell my teenage self, what would it be? I wish more than anything that I'd been open and honest and just said everything
Yeah.
to whoever, my therapist, my mom. I had older brothers and sisters who would have helped me. I wish I'd opened up. I wish I hadn't held so much back. Because it's in a weird way, buying the gun was a triggering event because now when I start to tell some of my other family and friends, like, hey, got a shotgun. I can't wait, and they loved me, but they were still worried about me. And they told me so, you know, and I took their love and I twisted it in my mind because, that's what happens when you're depressed or you're going through whatever. My mind warps their love and care and concern for me. And now I start thinking, you don't trust me.
Right.
You don't believe in me.
Right.
Nobody's ever going to trust me. Nobody's ever going to believe in me. And that's basically when I start to downward spiral, you know, because I'm literally Saturday nights, you know, I'm out with friends. And then Sunday, I wake up and I'm just crashing. And as the day goes on, it just gets worse and worse. And now also, I tell people, having the gun, now it is in my mind, there's no more fear of an attempted suicide. In my mind, it's one pull of the trigger and it's all over. There's no pain, no waiting, no suffering, just one pull and I'm gone. You know, and so then these thoughts are in my mind.
Because of the
And
purchase of the weapon, because now you had access to the gun.
now I have access, right?
Okay.
um and my mom has it, she has a trigger lock and everything. um but it doesn't take me very long to snoop it out. you know um and yeah, honestly though, as Sunday, the day before the shooting, goes on, and like I said, I've been just downward spiraling, and I'm thinking about just killing myself. But I'm also, my mind starts to be upset and say like, well, it's not my fault.
Okay.
And this is where the transition happens. This is where it's, I did what I should, I did what I could, was what I'm telling myself.
Okay.
I asked for help. I tried to do the right thing. And I start basically being like, it's the school. They didn't want to help me. They didn't care when I, wanted to get my life back on track. They wanted to just sweep me to the side. And, you know, um, and I'll tell you that the summer beforehand was the first time I was basically introduced to suicide by cop.
Okay.
A few neighborhoods over, there was a man who basically, we later learned he went off his medication, and I don't know if he had a rifle or what kind of gun. All I heard was he went up onto his rooftop with a gun, and I think he fired just bong bong bong. Police show up. standoff, SWAT, all like
Right.
that stuff. He's on his rooftop, and eventually he just picks up a gun and starts aiming it towards them, and he's dead before he hits the ground. Um, so now this is in my mind because I'm also starting to one find that I don't really think that I have the ability to pull the trigger on myself. As much as I'm thinking about it, as much as I'm just like, there's no missing, there's no pain, there's no waiting, it's over. I'm like, I don't really think I can do it. And then especially I'm thinking I can't, especially not in my house. I don't want my mom to come home and find me. I don't want her to have that memory always associated with this house. And that's why, yeah, I start being like, fuck it. I'm going into the school. I'm going to make them suffer. I'm going to make sure that they hear everything I have to say. Even though I didn't have anything I really wanted to verbally
Right.
say, but I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be heard. I tell people that these are some of the most common things in whether it's mass shootings, school shootings, whatever. It's the desire to want to be seen, heard, to feel like you're in power and control of your own life. And yes, I know the vast majority of people feel like that at times in their life where they're not in power and control. But this is the mindset that I had. And from talking with a lot of other people, it's a big piece of the puzzle for a lot of people who do something like this or worse. And so yeah, I basically I don't have any like serious logistic plans in my
Okay.
mind, but I'm just like, fuck it. I'm going in tomorrow, and I had different visions in my head of like being out in the parking lot and like shooting out car windows or stuff, or going in and basically just like, shooting into the ceiling, or going into a classroom and shooting out windows, or you know, different things had popped up in my mind. I basically was like, I don't know. I'll figure it out as I go along.
Was
And
was there any external influences leading you to this? I mean, other than the stuff going on in your head, but were you looking anywhere? Were you
yeah, so
researching?
I didn't really do any researching. Like um, I had an interest in whether we're talking about like school shootings or, terrorism, things of that nature, like crime and all like that. I had a little bit of an interest in it. I had, uh, I wouldn't say that I was like researching this stuff.
Maybe
Um,
morbid curiosity a little bit,
Morbid curiosity,
which I think is
and
normal.
which, yeah, I will say that like, I tell people like the movie Bowling for Columbine,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, seen it.
um I had watched that movie, and I wasn't really that fascinated with the movie, but there was a concept that really stuck out to me that wasn't so much about Columbine, but I remember, to me, like the biggest concept in that was our country is fucked. And I hate to say it like that, but it wasn't just so much like our country, but I think it was just kind of like the world is kind of fucked, you know. And this to me kind of took on a very nihilistic, there's really no meaning or purpose, nothing makes sense,
No,
why bother continuing to go on? And that was another big thing that was in my mind is, like, why bother continuing to go on? What's the point? What's the point of all of this? And so yeah, so I mean that definitely played an influence of, you know, um, of really just nothing feels like it makes sense. And yeah, this is a way to spread some pain and suffering to people who I blamed for my own pain and suffering.
but it sounds
Um,
like you didn't actually want to kill anybody. You just wanted to be
yeah,
heard and seen. Is that incorrect?
no, that's correct. Because I tell people, I know that there's a lot of, people going back and forth over what my intents were. I had 7.5 bird shot, right? It's
Okay.
used for squirrels,
I don't mean to laugh, but
small
yeah, that's
birds,
that's gonna hurt. It's not gonna
right?
kill.
Um, so I'm no marksman, but I had been to the shooting range once or twice before, with my older brother. And I basically know like this ammo is for target practice. You know what I mean? I know that if I do muster up the courage and, put the barrel in my mouth, it's going to end me. But I also know it's not, uh, it's not meant for killing people. It's
Right.
not even, you don't even want to use that for home defense,
Right.
right?
Right.
But yeah, so I'll tell you that morning, February 9th, 2004, I just grab a box, one box of ammo, and I grab my backpack and I grab the shotgun in its case because I know that the shotgun's case is like a hard plastic case that probably anybody looking at it, especially as I'm walking into a school with a backpack on, they're going to think it's like an instrument or something like that. And I drove in late to school that day, took my mom's truck, because she had two cars. So I took her truck, drove in, and just, park in the parking lot. And I walk in, walk in through the front door. There's no security at the time. There was some construction and stuff like that going on. But yeah, I just walk right in. Nobody sees me. And so basically, the makeup of the school is kind of with that entrance. I walk down the hall and go up some stairs to where all of the classrooms are kind of on the second floor.
How big is
Uh,
this school?
so I think there's about 1,200 students.
Okay.
So it's a pretty good sized school. And I, I go into the bathroom and I go
Holding
into,
this case, walking this
yeah,
case through the school.
I've got the case in my hands, backpack still on, and I just, walking in, like it's any other day, just walking in late. And I go up and I'm going to the bathroom and I basically sit in the stall. I take the gun out, but now all of a sudden, like, especially not only am I in the school, but now with the gun in my hand, it becomes
Right.
very real. Like I've been
Right.
on autopilot, just kind of disconnected from myself. But now all of a sudden it's real. Now I'm really there and it's weighing on me and I'm trying to talk myself out of it, but I feel like I'm at the point of no return. And I'm, I send off a text or two to a couple of friends, just basically being like, hey, what's up? Just trying to like get some type of interaction with somebody. And but this is also 2004, so like cell phones are somewhat common in school, but it's not like today, you know. So my friends, they don't even see the text messages until it's too late, after the shooting. And yeah, I'm literally just sitting there for like a half hour, 45 minutes, like trying to talk myself out of it. But I'm so terrified of getting caught, walking out, that I just convinced myself, besides, why would I leave? Why bother going home? Nothing's going to change. My life is just going to continue to be, nothing of substance, nothing of worth. There's no point. And yeah, so eventually I kind of work myself up into it, and I do send off a text to a few of my friends, and I just basically like, all right, this is it, So I send out a text and I say, I'm in school with a gun, get out. And this was because I didn't want them to see me. I didn't want them to be terrorized and to have that last memory of me, seeing me walking around. Because I figure like, all right, fire off some rounds, walk around. And yeah, so I send off that text message. And people also ask me like, what did it feel like in the moment?
Right. I'm curious about that too.
I disconnected again,
Understood.
um, you know, just kind of the whole disassociation where it's just like I didn't feel fully there, fully present, fully in control. Obviously, I was in control, but eh, again, it's just autopilot. I literally, because um, at one point I'm in the stall, bell rings, the period is over, everybody's filling up the hallways, people are coming into the bathroom, not even knowing I'm sitting in the stall with the gun in my hand. But I wait until after, a few minutes, the bell rings again, everybody's running back to class, bathroom is empty. I'm figuring, okay, the hallway's going to be empty. And I open up the door to the stall, and I start to walk out. Uh, but that's when I run into the first student, who he's actually like just starting to enter into the bathroom. So it's kind of one of those like mini like privacy hallways, you know what I mean, where you've got, and he's only a few feet away from me. He's like 3 feet away from me, literally just coming around the corner, enters into the bathroom, and he freezes in front of me. And he's just stuck for, a second or two, and he literally says, "This can't be happening."
Wow.
And because who the fuck expects to see that,
Nobody.
right? So yeah, I don't do anything. I just wait. He turns around and he runs, and so I'm just kind of walk out the bathroom, and he's diving into, he dives into the first classroom that was open right there. Slams the door shut, and as I'm coming around the corner now, I'm looking down a long stretch of this hallway, and there's two other students who they're now coming around the other end, good 30-40 feet away from me. And I can tell you, I even remember one of them, he screams out, "Oh shit." And there was a teacher in the classroom right there again. For her and for everybody else, any other day, they still
Right.
don't know what's going on. So she hears him yelling, "Oh shit." And I remember her yelling back at him, "Watch your mouth." And I kind of aim up and away from them a little bit, and I fire, and they turn and they start to run, and I fire again. Both shots went wide away from them. But it's birdshot pellets, and some of the interior walls are like metal.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So most of it's hitting like up in the ceiling tiles, but there's a lot of it that's hitting, these metal chunks of wall and just going everywhere. But yeah, now it's everybody knows I'm there, right? The hall's empty, but I'm just walking, and I remember just kind of walking past closed doors, and I didn't even try to open them or anything like that, but there's this one door, it's wide open, and I just walk over, and I stand in the doorway, and I look into the class, and yeah, everybody's on the ground hiding from me. uh, um, and I remember the teacher's at the front of the class. She's underneath like a table that she had kind of set up next to her desk, and she's underneath it. And I still remember her crying out, "Oh Lord." And everybody else is just looking up at me. And this one girl, she kind of raises her head up above her desk, and she's looking at me with confusion and horror, because she was one of the people. I was just out Saturday night with a bunch of friends, and she sees me, and her and I weren't really friends, but you know those are some of the things that haunt me most. And I just turned around and walked out, and I'm just walking down the hallway now, and at this point I'm just kind of like, this is it. you know and I'm thinking it's just a matter of time before the police show up. And that's when I got grabbed from behind. A vice principal
Okay.
had heard the shots being fired, and
You fired
like I
two
said,
shots by this
I
time,
fired
correct?
2 shots at this point, and he comes to investigate because he was kind of a little ways off, so you hear that and you're not thinking gunshots. Especially, like
Right.
I said, there was some construction going on in parts of the school, so he's thinking maybe something happened, or maybe it's firecrackers. Nobody's really thinking that it's gunshots that you're hearing. um, but yeah, so he comes up behind me, and he reaches and he grabs around me. He grabs, the barrel in one side and the stock, and he basically just like, squeezes me, like kind of holding onto the gun and like holding onto me in a bear hug type thing. Um, and at first I'm just kind of like, trying to, like push and trying to like, what the fuck is going on? I start trying to get this guy off of me. Um, and after, a couple of seconds, I start trying to like shake him off my back because, he's kind of like, we're still standing, but he's, like I said, kind of reaching around me, but he's also like leaning into me hard. So I'm trying to shake him off my back and my fingers on the trigger, and the gun goes off. And I didn't know there was a teacher coming up behind us,
Okay.
and the teacher gets hit in the shin.
Okay.
I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know I just shot somebody. I didn't know it until much later on. Um, but basically the gun goes off and I'm still trying to shake this guy off, man. I'm like, all right, after a little bit, I just raise my hands and I'm like, all right, I give up. And he just brings me into like there's a little teacher's office, and he brings me in there and basically just waits until the police show up. But everybody's now coming to investigate, and he's letting everybody know I've got him. It's okay. It's over. And, I tell people it's crazy because I remember specifically hearing somebody ask, is everybody okay? And I remember him saying, no, you know, somebody's been shot. And like I remember hearing it, but it didn't register in my brain because even later that night I get arrested, and I'm brought to the police department. And when I'm arraigned, the news is obviously all over the place. And I remember as I'm leaving the courtroom, they're asking me, why did you shoot him? Why did you shoot him?
Okay.
And I remember thinking in my mind, shoot who? I didn't shoot anybody, because even though I had heard it, and, now even as they're talking about it in my mind, it still does not register that I had shot somebody,
Okay.
you know? Um, but yeah, so I mean, thankfully, I mean, unfortunately, he was injured, but thankfully, he was the only person who was injured. His injuries were, harmful, but not horrible. You know,
Right.
um,
Right. Understood.
he's in and out of the hospital within a short period of time. Um, you know, Psychologically, him and everybody else is now horribly traumatized. And this is 20 years later, they still are. A lot of people are because of me. Um, but yeah, that's, so it just basically came to the point where eventually I just plead guilty uh, to a 20-year sentence, because I'm just like, even in jail, like I didn't care about my life anymore.
Were
No
you tried as an
real.
adult?
Yeah. So in New York
Okay.
State at that time, at 16 years old, you're automatically an adult. If they
Gotcha.
want to, reduce it afterwards, they can. But I was treated as an adult. I was, even in the county jail and state, prisons, I was always housed with adults. And I'm a bigger guy, you know. Um, Not that that makes you bulletproof,
Right.
but um, when I was in jail, it's just kind of uh, just doing my time for a while. And like I said, I pled guilty, got 20 years because I was facing 75 years,
Okay.
which in New York State does not have a lot of good time. That's a life sentence.
Gotcha.
It's not like I would have gotten 75 and been home in 20.
Right. Right.
Um, so I plead guilty because I'm basically like, all right, um, I don't even care. I don't care about fighting for what did, actually happen versus what didn't happen. Um, I'm not interested in a media circus. And yeah, I just go about, for a few years, just doing the bid, doing the time.
Let me ask you,
Hmm.
going back to those moments just before you stepped out of the bathroom,
Yeah.
what would have stopped you?
I could have stopped myself. I always tell people that. I could have called my mom. I could have called my therapist. Because even though I had sent, a couple of texts to friends and stuff like that, yeah, what did I expect? This is not when people are texting in classrooms all the
Right.
time.
Right.
So that was a faint-hearted attempt at me reaching out. Um, but as far as anybody else, like people ask, well, if I'd run into you, what could I have said or done to maybe have helped? Right? I don't really know the exact answer besides maybe, if somebody somehow had known what was going on as I'm sitting there in that stall and just had that, you don't have to do this. Yeah, it could have stopped me, you know? And I tell people it's never too late because, as I said, I was in the stall, basically telling myself I'm at the point of no return. It's too late.
Right. Right.
I want everybody to know, right? I know I've been very long-winded talking about everything, but at the end of the day, I want everybody to know that it's never too late to turn your life around. It's never too late if you're struggling or suffering to get the help that you need. Even if you're literally sitting there with a gun in your hands, wanting to hurt yourself or wanting to hurt everybody else, it's never too late to stop yourself. And it's never too late to share your love and concern for somebody in your life who you're afraid may want to hurt themselves or others. Um, I I honestly believe that. Um, even you know, even with people who have done school shootings, mass shootings, ended the lives of many people, a lot of times they're fighting with themselves before they do it. They want to stop themselves. And I say that because, what was his name? Nicholas Cruz from Parkland, Florida. Um, you know, the FBI has, released a lot of the stuff, including his, what he was Googling and stuff like that.
Right.
In 2 days before he killed 17 people, he was Googling for, I think it was therapeutic help for homicidal tendencies,
Okay.
you know? Um, so what he did was monstrous, but that shows me that, yeah, even as monstrous of an act that he committed, there was also a small part of him that wanted to stop himself. And
There's
that's
still
why
a
I tell
human
people
component to all of it.
there's still that's why I don't like to call him or others monsters. I say that what they did was monstrous. And I say that because when you just say that somebody's a monster, you can't stop a monster except with violence, right? There's still a human component to him and others. And I know that especially for his victims and their families, I don't, I hate for them to hear me even say those words because if they want to call him a monster, go right ahead. I try to
They're
say,
traumatized.
right. And for anybody else, I completely understand it. I say it only because I want you to realize that there is a human aspect that can be helped and we can prevent these tragedies from happening. There's always a way to prevent it from happening. And yeah, sometimes maybe preventative measures, somebody is too much of a threat and they have made, verbal threats or whatever, they have access to weapons and they need to be locked up. but I also believe there can be a very therapeutic component to helping people before they ever even want to pick up that gun and hurt themselves or anybody else. And I think that's a really great focus, that we can spend a lot more resources on, is proactive care instead of reactive care. Um,
That's actually one of the biggest things I wanted to talk to you about. And
yeah.
a couple things like before we talked the other day, I'd spoken to several of my law enforcement friends and said, I'm gonna talk to this person. And
Mhm.
90% of them were like, awesome, good. Get their
Yeah.
perspective, talk about what's going on. And then I had a
Yeah.
few that were like, nope, he's just grandiosing for himself. He just wants to talk about himself. They're all manipulators, they're fucking monsters and all that. And I'm being
Yeah.
honest with you because I think you've been extremely
No.
honest with me.
Yeah.
And hearing your story, I don't get that feeling from you. And even when we just had this small little meet and greet the other day, I didn't get that
Mhm.
feeling from you. And that is my biggest question in today's society. And listening to your story, you attempted to do the work,
Mhm.
you did ask for help, but there was this component inside of you, and whether it was shame because of what had happened to you, or
Mhm.
whatever the case was, how can we get our youth, our youngest generations to understand and move forward and ask for help and actually
Right.
do the work and not just the superficial work? Not to take away from what you did. It's not like
No,
like
no,
you
100%.
how do
Um,
we move forward and reach the youth, especially in today's world where they're all stuck on these damn things and social
yeah.
media and all this crap.
Yeah, so this is what I spend a lot of time talking about with law enforcement and school administration, anybody who's interacting with youth who may be troubled psychologically, behaviorally, however. In fact, in a couple of days, I'm going down to Palm Beach, Florida, where I'll be speaking at a conference with a whole bunch of law enforcement there. And basically, my message to them, to all of your listeners, especially those who are working in law enforcement or schools, in order to help out those who are struggling, we first need to educate them. I strongly believe in emotional intelligence being brought into the schools. I don't mean turning schools into counseling,
Right.
where every classroom is a therapy session. No, I just mean when you educate people on what their emotions are, how to identify them, and how to cope with them, and how to communicate them, you're going to have people who are able to better manage their emotions and are less likely to have all that pressure build up until they explode, either taking it out on themselves, whether it's through just staying home and killing themselves,
Yeah.
because most schools will never, ever experience a student showing up to school with a gun. Every school, every high school in America, at least most of the big ones, and I'm sure probably plenty of the little ones, will have a student who stays home and kills themselves.
Absolutely.
And not to mention drugs and all of the addiction and overdoses issues. When you educate, especially the young, on their emotions and all of that, you know, all those ways to work with your emotions, the difficult ones and even the good ones, then you can better um, prevent all of these other tragedies that are going to happen. So, what I tell people is, if you're a teacher, or even if you're a parent, right? If you're talking about a story or history story, current event, anything from Clifford the Big Red Dog to Romeo and Juliet, don't just talk about what happened and maybe asking why. Dive deeper. Ask about the different characters, what their emotions may have been, what were some of the signs that those were their emotions, what were some maybe red flags in any characters who were going down the wrong path. How
Okay.
could that character have seen it within themselves? How could other characters have seen it within that person? How could that character help themselves? How could others help them? So on and so forth, where you're able to even just through that means right there, diving a little bit deeper into the emotions of characters or real people from historical or current events, you can teach people more about their own emotions and how to work with it, or the emotions of others and how to work with it. Um,
There
not
was
to mention,
zero talk of emotions when I was in school. I'm 42 years old and I still have problems processing my own emotions. And you know what I mean? So what you're
yeah,
talking about, this is very complex stuff. Like, how do
right,
we reach them? And these are great
yeah,
suggestions.
and yeah, and so that's the thing, is when you first are educating them about all of this, you're giving them the knowledge about what it is, and then also I advise that parents, teachers, law enforcement, whatever is age appropriate, open up to these kids as well. You can't expect it to be a one-way street where they open up to you. You
Amen.
have to open up to them as well, because the more that you open up to them, they will understand that, one, they're not alone in their own pain, struggles, whatever trials and tribulations they're going through. And they will feel more comfortable opening up to you, because now you've let down your guard.
Yeah.
Now they can let down their guard. It's not going to happen every time, but it's more likely to happen when you open up to people, and maybe you can't um open up, depending on what, if you're certain law enforcement or school district or whatever, maybe you can't open up about your own issues. But maybe if you talk about other adults who they look up to, you talk about the issues or the trials that those people have overcome. Letting kids know that other people are going through the same thing that you are
Yeah.
can help them out. Letting them know that adults are not perfect, that adults went through the same problems as kids that you are, and that they have good lives today, that their problems that they had when they were teenagers didn't define them for the rest of
Right.
their life. It helps them understand that they can overcome whatever they're going through as well. When you give them that confidence that, oh, other people have overcome it, so can I. And especially if you're telling them, hey, I went through the same thing. Hey, I was drinking, I was skipping school, but you know what? I managed to then find, whether it's the military or whatever gave you meaning and purpose and structure and direction and helped you get back on track. Let them know about that. And it's not that you're trying to like force them to take the same coping mechanisms that you did, but it's allowing them to realize that they can overcome whatever's going on within them.
I think we
And
lack such huge coping skills nowadays. People just
I,
don't know
I,
how to cope with anything.
I mean, I think that it's always been a problem,
Yes.
right? In my opinion. And I do think that social media has definitely made things worse in certain aspects,
Amen.
but it's
Amen.
also it's made things more visible. The problems that you, I, and our neighbors are having are now visible. We didn't
Yes.
see them before. You just thought that Joe down the street, and his kids were living a fine life. Now you've got a window
Right.
into their, and you see that it's not so great. Um, but can it also encourage worse actions and behaviors? Definitely. Um, so are things a little bit different today than they were when, early 2000s when I was a teenager, or, from when you were growing up? Sure. But
I,
we
I
can also,
I don't
sorry.
think they are. I think it's the same. We're
Well,
all dealing with the same things. But the social media aspect does open it up a little
right.
bit more. But I think we're
It,
all
it,
dealing with the same things.
yeah, it opens us up to so much more exposure as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
Where, a video that you or I took when we were kids, on an old, video camera that you had to switch over to VHS
Yeah.
somehow. Those videos are long gone. You know what I mean? The videos that get put on the internet today could very well be there forever.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a heavy stress on kids when they're trying to figure out who they are,
Yeah.
what is normal, and they're also under threat of people embarrassing them or
Yeah.
whatever, recording it and putting it out there. Um, but I say that to also say that, getting back to what can a lot of adults do to help out these kids, is I think it's all about um, erasing the stigmas as well. And you do that through that education, you do that through that opening up to them. And it's not going to work every time,
Right.
right? But this will increase the odds of getting through and helping somebody before they do something drastic. And I'm a big believer in basically having more social emotional learning programs. I know that those can be controversial. Maybe some programs are a little bit different than others, but for the most part, from what I've seen, uh, I think that they're a really great tool that can help bring that curriculum into the schools.
Okay.
Again, teachers are already doing enough, but a lot of times these curriculums, they might be adding, not a lot more work to be done. They're just changing how some of the work is being done, if that
Okay.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Just the way they're approaching it.
The way that they're approaching it. Again, I think the biggest thing is, as long as we're making it acceptable, and as long as we're encouraging, discussing, these emotions and the mental well-being of individuals in schools, then we're going to make sure that a lot more people know what's going on within them, and they're going to feel more comfortable communicating. And that's going to ease up for a lot of the stresses that we have. Now, when it comes to security, right? Because again, a lot of your audience is law enforcement. So let's talk about it. I have a big problem with turning schools into prisons, basically.
Okay.
And I say that because for two reasons. One, I'm afraid of self-fulfilled prophecies, right? And that basically means is when you act like something is, very real and a possible threat, sometimes you create that threat. Because if I'm going to school and I'm constantly seeing, you know, bulletproof glass, armed teachers, armed guards walking around, everybody's got a key in and all like that, I'm going to be on fucking edge. That's
Right.
going to set my anxiety. That's going to make me feel like I'm unsafe. And I'll be honest, I don't talk about this much, but like, before I did what I did, obviously like Columbine and other shootings were very common, and they're all over the media. I was afraid at times, after all of that was going on. And that fear can also be turned into anger.
Yeah.
And, some of my interest in going into law enforcement or military was my also thought that, if I have the gun, I don't have to be afraid, which is a teenage stupid thought, right? Because obviously law enforcement, military, you're still afraid.
Right.
But I remember the atmosphere being like, oh shit, this is a very real thing. And it morphed into my mind where I felt like I'd rather be the one with the gun, whether I'm doing good or bad. I want that gun. I want that power and control. And so that's why I'm afraid that, for one, self-fulfilled prophecies, you turn schools into these like maximum security prison type issues. You're going to create a lot of anxiety that also may, increase a lot of people's anxiety, fear, depression, and lead to more suicides, drug overdoses, whatever, because people are going to cope in one way or another.
Right.
And it's
What
not
are your
always
thoughts on
healthy.
SROs, armed
Our
police
SROs.
officers?
So I say this, right? I've worked with some SRO organizations, and like the first one who reached out to me, I think that it's very important that not any cop can be an SRO, right?
Correct. Very
Because
correct.
you have to have a very different mentality.
Amen.
And in my opinion, you should have a greater education in childhood development and things of that nature, and psychology. And also, I don't believe, if they want to be armed, and I don't tell people that if you want to arm yourself or not, I don't really think that that's going to make as much of a difference one way or another that you might think. If you have SROs in a school, you have to understand that, one, they should not be dressed as regular cops, right? The black head to toe, mirrored sunglasses, that's a very military look. And it can be very intimidating. That's why the uniform is the way it is. It's to kind of intimidate those who may be criminals. And,
Officer presence is the first line of deterrence. So showing up in that militaristic style uniform is the first sign of authority being on scene. I agree with what you're saying there.
Exactly, right? So like the SROs that I've worked with that I really like is they're going in with a different uniform, right? Whether you got like the light blue shirts like back in the day, or even just, a polo shirt, khaki, and your badge. And yeah, if you want to have a gun, great. But then the second part of why I don't like schools having super amounts of security, and this is a scary thing to talk about, but you can have $1 million worth of security, right? All of that stuff I just mentioned, key cards, bulletproof glass, all of that. I don't remember the exact year, in 1996, 1997, Jonesboro, Arkansas, there was a middle school shooting. And you know what they did? It was two kids, 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. One of them went in, pulled the fire alarm.
Okay.
Everybody now leaves the school, goes outside, and that's where the two kids were waiting with guns.
Oof.
So that's what I tell people is you have this $1 million or however much security, bulletproof glass. Yeah, it can help deter things from happening inside, but you're not actually preventing anything. You're just changing how it's going to happen, you know? And that's a very scary thought. And
Yeah.
that's why I tell people I like to work on preventing somebody from ever wanting to pick up that gun in the first place. So if you do have SROs can make that very good impact when they're basically almost like counselors, right? When they're in there, they're able to make people feel somewhat safe. If a lot of if some people do feel safe having an armed, guard or armed officer there, but also you want to make people feel comfortable with you,
I agree.
right?
I agree.
And that's why it's super important to have SROs who are of a different mentality, dressed differently, and interacting with the youth, in a way that they can make that same difference that the teachers can by opening up and talking with them. Because I speak at conferences with SROs, and I've met some really great ones who literally just break down in tears talking with me about like how much they want to help these kids. And I love that. And so it is all about how can you open up to these kids, sharing your own life experiences or some of the trials and tribulations like I spoke about. SROs can do that as well, hopefully. I see some great officers, on TikTok and social media where, hey, they got no problem at the end of the day. They'll go out and shoot some hoops with the kids,
Right.
or, you got to interact with the kids. You got to make them feel comfortable, because if they don't feel comfortable with you, they're not going to feel safe with you. And if they don't feel safe with you, then what's the point?
Right.
You
Right.
know what I mean?
I very much agree with that. I
Yeah.
never could have been an SRO, but yeah, you have to have that level of comfort with one, kids.
Right.
It doesn't matter what the age group is, and two, a deeper understanding of their psyche, and you're intimidating.
Right. Exactly.
Just you by being a police officer are in fact intimidating.
And,
Male,
and
female,
that,
doesn't matter. It's just a position of
right.
authority.
You're in a position of authority, which actually, let me go back, and whether you're a law enforcement, a teacher, administration, or a parent, you also have to remember when you want kids to open up to you, even if you're trying to open up to them and you're doing all these other things, they see you as an authority figure.
Yes.
They might be afraid that opening up to you will have certain consequences. So you have to let them know, all right, I'm going to give you a 5-minute time period, or maybe not that, but you got to let them know you can talk to me right now and no consequences, basically. Yeah. Because I wanted to protect my mom sometimes, but I also wanted to protect myself. I didn't want to get in trouble if I'm thinking, you know what I mean? If I'm thinking about ending my own life or all like that, I'm trying to protect her at times, but at other times, I'm not trying to be basically watched like a hawk. And I think
right.
the same thing is said for everyday kids, that just don't want to open up to their parents, teachers, definitely not law enforcement. So it's also about letting them know if you are an SRO or a teacher or whoever, they see you as an authority figure. And sometimes it's a very fine line of maintaining your authority while allowing people to know I'm not going to report everything you say to me. There's not going to be consequences if you are going through something, if you have done something that you're not proud of. There's not always going to be consequences. You can talk with me, and that's why it's also important to, like I said, the more that you open up to them and let them know that, yeah, you might be an adult, you might have an authority figure, but you're just a human being like they are. And
one of the problems, though, is that there's some of them are per law, they're mandatory reporters. So this,
I hate that.
I absolutely hear you on this, but it's
right.
also like if they don't report it and then it comes to find out, they're in trouble.
Oh,
so
yeah, I get
hear
that.
you on this.
That's why I said there's a very fine balance between maintaining your authority and allowing that. And I'll be honest, I've talked with a lot of people in the mental health field, psychologists and all like that. That rule has good intentions, but it probably does more harm than good. Because I also tell people, avoid loaded language when you're speaking with these kids, right? And by that, I mean, if you straight up ask them about any type of, thoughts of hurting themselves or others, they're going to know if they say yes, then there's probably going to be consequences because you're mandated to report that.
Right.
And so they're going to lie to you.
Right.
Most everybody who's been asked that, as they're thinking about hurting themselves or hurting anybody else, they're going to just lie because they don't want the consequences. And if people felt more comfortable opening up and saying, yes, they are suicidal, or yes, they are even thinking about hurting other people, it's a very tricky situation. But I do believe the
Agreed.
current situation of just mandating that, he wants to hurt himself, well, 72 hours in the hospital, that's not going to help people as much as we want it to. I understand we want to make sure that nobody cries out for help or nobody shows signs of leakage, right? That's what the FBI talks about, is leakage, is when somebody who's planning on hurting themselves or others, lets some of that information slip. We don't want that information to go ignored and then the person follows through with it later
Right.
on.
Right.
So I don't have all the answers. None of us do.
I know. Very
I
complicated.
just, these are the conversations that I've had with a lot of people, and it's my thoughts on how we can better do things. Maybe I just know that, I know that SROs are in a very tricky place where schools are usually very underfunded. Um,
Very.
Sometimes SROs are sometimes in schools where there's probably not a whole lot of crime going on, and they get used for purposes that they shouldn't be used in.
I
You
agree.
know,
I agree.
um, you know, so it's a very difficult thing. Um, I understand the want, the desire for the program. I just think that the program needs to be ran the correct way. Um, and like I said, that's why I talk with a lot of SROs, um, because I know that they are very passionate about their job, very passionate about helping these kids.
Yep.
And so we're all just trying to figure out how can they help out the most in the best way, and how can we prevent, you know, any type of abuses from happening, whether it's you as an SRO, you might have every good intention, but the administration is putting pressure on you to do certain things that really you shouldn't be doing.
Right.
You know what I mean? You should not be there to enforce, kids acting right in the classroom.
I
You
agree
should
with
be
you.
there to basically help make sure that crime isn't happening, that everybody feels safe, and you can break up fights or whatever like that that happen. And interacting with the kids, and just like I said, on a counselor role as well.
I think it should be a
But
lot more based on educating the kids about law enforcement and that type of stuff. And again, just don't just sit in a little office and wait for crime to happen, but get out, walk around,
yeah,
mingle, be part of the school, like pretend like you're one of the teachers and just, throughout your day.
I mean,
I never was an
I
SRO, so I
would,
don't mean to tell them how to do their job. I'm just from an
yeah,
outside
no,
looking in.
no, nor am I ever telling anybody how to do your job, right?
Right, right.
I'm just somebody with a fucked up background trying to, I'm just trying to help out however I can. You know what I mean? But I think the last thing I'll say with the SROs is you have a greater impact than you know. You are helping more than you know, but you should also be more cautious than you might even realize. As cautious as you are, as mindful as you are, there's always so many ways that as children we see the world in a very different lens.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm sure that they're aware of that, but you're having an impact. And I hope that the school administration or your own department's administration can allow you to do your job in the best way to help these kids the most. That's my wish for them, and for the kids as well that are in schools with them.
I sincerely appreciate all of your time. I want to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
And that question has to do with the cocktail of drugs that you were put on and the subsequent usage of that after you were out and all that good stuff. What are your thoughts on using such heavy, powerful mind altering, mood altering, SSRIs, Xanax, all that type of stuff at such a young age. And because there's been talk about this on the news, they talk about, oh, all the
Mhm.
school shooters are all on SSRIs and this or that. So what are your thoughts on that in regards to using pharmaceuticals for the mental health side of the aspect at such a young age?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a need for more studies to be done. And I mean that in the way of, I would say we need to develop better medications for kids who need it. Most of these medications, if not all of them, are developed for adults, and they're only tested on adults for the most part that I know. Or it's been a while since I've looked into a lot of these, the FDA studies and everything that happens. But some kids are chemically imbalanced more so than what is healthy and what is safe. So they do need some type of medication. I get that. I needed something. But the current medications, I believe, are not the answer.
Okay.
And we've been relying on them for far too long. And I hope that we can develop something that is um, created for and better suited for adolescence. It's a very difficult thing to do when you get into the ethics of testing with, adolescents and everything, but um, the status quo just isn't good enough in my eyes. You know,
Gotcha.
like I tell people too. I do want to clarify that I'm not blaming the medications for anything that I did. Um, you know, did it play a part? Maybe we'll never really know.
Right.
As I talk about all of these things, it's really me just trying to make the most sense out of my life and what I've done and trying to help other people better understand it because I believe that the better that we can understand what leads up to these things happening, what the thought process is, then the more that we can do to help people who are in that mindset or how we can help people to never even get into that
No.
mindset. You know, um, law enforcement has a tough job reacting to these crimes. So, what else can we do to work more on preventing these crimes from ever
Amen.
happening? You know, so
John, I really, really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your thoughts and your openness.
yeah.
And I would like to release this, get some feedback, and see if maybe we could come back with some questions and all that if you're ever willing to. Like, so we can talk about that at a later
Listen,
time. But
I'm very happy to have been able to speak with you and to all your listeners. I know this has been a very long, drawn out conversation, um, but I really appreciate those who have come listening to this with an open mind, and hopefully we can make those changes
amen.
to better help people in the future. And I would love for anybody who's seeing this right now who has questions for me can always, reach out to you. People can always reach out to me. I'm very out there. I'm all over social media, John Seeking Peace. And even my email is johnseekingpeace@gmail.com. But I mean, we can definitely come back and we can have another episode if you want. We can have another conversation, kind of as a follow up if that's what you're into, if that's what your audience is interested in. I'm always interested in doing this
Awesome.
uh, because I think that we can definitely make a difference and help save people.
Amen. I agree. Thank you so much, John. And again, it was John Seeking Peace on Instagram, John Seeking Peace at Gmail to get a hold of you. For any other law
Mhm.
enforcement officers out there that want to get a hold of you and have a conversation,
Yeah,
highly
I
recommend it. So,
definitely. I'm very open to it. Like I said, I do conferences around the country with the FBI, their behavioral analysis units, and
I commend them for doing that. I absolutely do. I think you're a part of the process. Just like if the world's best hacker is hacking into anything, well, don't
mhm.
use them so that you can find out how to secure your stuff. Well, you're someone you've been through the shit, and now
Right.
you're
Yeah.
you're open and honest about what you went through and some preventative measures. So I fully commend that, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, John, we'll talk soon. All right, you take care, man.
All right. You
All right,
too.
bye.
All right. Bye.